So thank you for joining today. Today we're going to be talking about just-in-time provisioning and single sign-on for mobile applications. We may not have time to get to the quiz, but I'm going to publish the quiz today because we're not going to have a Sunday session later this week, but you'll be able to get to the questions on your own after this session. And so we're going to start with just-in-time provisioning. And just-in-time provisioning, often JIT or WIT, depending on how you pronounce it. But what is it? So just-in-time provisioning is used in combination only with SAML single sign-on. So if you have enabled federated sign-on for either your Salesforce org or for your Experience Cloud site, you can enable SAML and you can add just-in-time provisioning. It's used to create users and to also update the user access from both Salesforce and Experience Cloud. The benefits are pretty clear. It's going to reduce admin costs because you don't have to create users in multiple places. You'll increase user adoption, and you also increase security because you can apply your security settings across the board. And again, just-in-time provisioning only works with SAML. And we're going to look at it in detail today. So first, the general flow. When a user is first trying to access Salesforce from single sign-on with SAML, if they have never accessed the site before and it's the first time, they will be created as part of the flow. So and after the first time, it's going to update the user if the SAML assertion includes any details about the user. It's used for both Salesforce org and for Experience Cloud users. And the general flow is we're going to get the SAML assertion with just-in-time provisioning enabled. It's going to do a user search first. If the user is found, it's going to update that user record and any related records. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And it's going to grant access. If the user is not found, it creates the user. And this is the basic flow for it. We get into a lot of detail in a little bit, but do we have any questions here? Okay, let's keep going. So first, we're going to look at just-in-time provisioning for Salesforce Access because it does work differently than Experience sites. It requires my domain name to be enabled. It requires SAML SSO to be enabled. And the standard, you can either use standard provisioning or you can customize it. It's going to be able to, you can work with your identity provider, and depending on the attributes that are sent from your IDP, you can either use the federated ID or other user ID, username to be able to create that user. If you're creating new users, your SAML assertion attribute statement has to include the user fields. Otherwise, it's not going to create that properly. And it's going to support both standard and custom user fields. And so for Salesforce, it's just creating the user or updating the user record. There are no other records that are affected by just-in-time provisioning. The attribute statement needs to have the required fields for email, last name, and profile ID. Profile ID can be either the Salesforce ID itself, or it can be the name of the profile. Salesforce is going to go look up that record if you give the name instead of the ID, which I thought was kind of nice, even though it's a little confusing, but it does do both. When you're first inserting a record, you can also include the federated ID and the username. If you send those as part of, if the user had already been created, you cannot update them as the second update. So a federated ID and a username cannot be updated with just-in-time provisioning. If your assertion includes the isActive flag equals true, and the user was inactive in Salesforce, then just-in-time provisioning will also reactivate it. You can include it every time, and it's going to be ignored if the user is already active.
Sorry. So the federation ID and the username is required for just-in-time.
Only when you're creating the record. Only when you're inserting the record.
Okay. Inserting the record, meaning, sorry.
So if your IDP knows that this user has not been created in Salesforce, and it's the very first time it's sending it, it has to include the federated ID and the username. Okay. Because let's say you're using Okta, and Okta is going to get back a user ID from Salesforce, it would know if that user has been created or not. If it has been created, even though you send it, and let's say the first time your Federated ID was a number, but then you change it to be numbers and letters, it is not going to be updated. You'd have to update the Federated ID through a different mechanism, not through SAML assertion.
Okay. Thank you.
And for Salesforce, you're welcome. And for Salesforce, you can, with the SAML assertion, depending on how you have it set up, most of the time you're going to be using Federated ID, but you can use other user attributes like the username or the user ID. They're both going to work. And again, this is only for the Salesforce CRM full license access. And I thought it was interesting, you can activate a user as part of sending the request. So if your user lost access from Salesforce for some reason and you re-enable it, it's going to allow you to give them access again, which is kind of nice. So you can also, aside from using the standard provisioning, you can also customize it and you can provide your own custom handler. Salesforce does allow you to auto create these, which is kind of nice. But if you have it, you need to make sure that you select the class that you've created, or you select automatic create this Apex class for you and the system will create it. After it's been created for you, you still want to update it because it does have some things in there that you want to customize, but it's still nice to get the bulk of the class done for you. And you need to provide the user that's going to create these records for you. It's best practice that you only grant the permissions that they need. So if they're only going to be creating internal users, the only permission this user needs is manage internal users. The other permission called manage users has a lot of other system permissions that it's better not to give to this user unless you have to. So again, it's a best practice to give manage internal users only for the Salesforce access aspect of it. So let's talk about now about giving provisioning users for Experience Cloud sites. This works a little bit differently. One of the things that you want to make sure you do is Experience Cloud only supports Federated ID. It's not going to support username, user ID, or any other attributes. It has to be Federated ID, and it can come in either the subject or in the attributes. As long as you have the SAML user ID type as Federated ID, it should work fine for you. Keep in mind when you set up single sign-on for experience sites, your entity ID and your issuer are a unique combination. And so you may want to use the URL of your site as your entity ID to make sure that it does not have any issues. Remember that when you create single sign-on for your experience site, you need to include your org ID in the recipient URL, otherwise it's not going to work properly. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But just single sign-on for Experience Cloud is a little bit different than it is for a regular, just the standard Salesforce org. Again, here you can still do the custom handler. You can still create your own Apex class, or you can have Salesforce create yours automatically for you. This one is very different. So the user that you're going to select as the one that's going to be creating the users for you. And I'm sorry, I forgot to change this. This is what I typed before I learned it doesn't actually work this way. Please ignore this best practice. I'll update the presentation before I post it. Experience Cloud sites require managed user permission. So even though you may want to only give it the lower permissions, if you do this, it will fail. Once I actually tested it in my org and I created permissions that it only had the required permissions, it did not work. It told me that the user has to have managed user permission before it will work. So I will update this presentation and post it. But remember, for Experience Cloud, managed users is required for the executing user. Questions?
No. Marlene, but I wanted to tell you last time, remember when you had gone through the quiz, you said through screen flow, we cannot, you remember you gave options as screen flow, but while you also gave a trailhead to for the Experience Cloud using the sales screen flow. So that option, you can also, I forgot the question, but one of the question was screen flow can also be used. It can be used.
Okay. for registration, I think you mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. That's good to know.
Okay.
Thank you for confirming that.
Okay.
So now let's look at the user experience for when the user is found. So when you're in Experience Cloud, if you remember, you're going to be creating a user record, a contact record, and an account, because an Experience Cloud user requires all three records for it to work properly. So the way that the just-in-time provisioning is working is it comes in, it's going to search the user either by the subject or the attribute element. It just has to be the federated ID. If the user is found, it's going to check if the assertion includes is true equals active. If it is, it's going to update the user to active. If not, it just updates the user. Any information you provide in the assertion is also going to update the contact, and it's also going to update the account. Once that's done, it's going to grant access. One of the things that I found interesting is the user fields. You're able to update both custom and standard fields for user, but for contact and account, you can only update standard fields. So if you have a custom field in contact and you want to update it through the assertion that is not supported, you would have to only update the standard fields. So this is the flow. If the user is found, it will update all the records. And I'm going to walk through each one of the flows. If the user is not found, but the contact is found, it's going to follow this flow. So it still searches for the user. It's not found. So now we have another layer down here where it's going to search the contact by either the contact ID that you provide in the assertion or by the email address. What I think is interesting here, it's not using the federated ID, it's using the email that you provide for the contact. If the contact is found, it will update the contact standard fields, and it will also update the account. If you are going to create a new user, it does require the email, the last name, profile ID, and username to be created for it to work properly, and then it grants the access. So the user is created because it was not found up here. So you have the contact, and this user is going to be provisioned as part of this experience. Because this contact is associated to an existing account, it's not creating an account, it's just updating that account in of itself. And your assertion needs to include the last name in case it needs to be created, but it's actually not used in the search. Again, when you're searching for contacts, it's only looking at the contact ID or the email address provided. The last flow, which we're just adding another layer here, is the contact is not found, and we're going to search the account by either the account ID or the account number. Here again, the assertion is going to provide the account name, but the account name is not used. It's only using the ID and the number. When the account is found, it's updating the contact, then it's creating the, it's updating the account, then it's creating the contact, and you need to make sure you provided the last name or email, otherwise this is going to fail. After the contact gets created, it creates the new user, and after the user is created, then it grants access. So each one of these is showing you what happens if it doesn't find each one of the records. And then, the last one is when we didn't find the account, so then the account gets created, and then it creates the contact and the user. So the whole flow for just-in-time provisioning is on this screen. And you can see, depending on each level of what it's finding, it's going to keep going either down the next path or across the branch to create the records. So that was a lot of information. Any questions?
Manin, if it is a person account, right, still the flow will be the same because it technically creates the contact and account record both, right?
Yes, that's correct. And originally, if you go to some of the older documentation, you're going to find it says it does not support person account, but that changed a few, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. I'm not exactly sure when, but now it does support person accounts, both for logging in and for creating the user. So you're correct. It would basically just create them in sequence here. And it does create that junction table between account and contact to create the person account.
And thanks for that info, Manin. And one more question is, let's say if we are building Experience Cloud site and users, we are supposed to grant our, we are going to give them standard user license instead of the community. is there any consideration on how that flow will occur? Like, I'm guessing it will be like same as an internal user, I'm not sure even if that is not allowed.
Which license
So
were
the
you
scenario
going
is
to give them? Which license is
standard
it?
user,
Yes.
standard user.
And so if you give them a standard
Um,
user to a community site, it wouldn't go through this flow, but it would go through the other one, because then it's only going to
Mhm.
create the user record and it's not going to create contact or account.
All right, yeah. But we can still use the just-in-time provisioning for that, right? So
You can. It works a little
Mhm.
bit differently when you give employees access to the experience site, because you can still give those
Mhm.
users access to the experience site. And it would still work with just-in-time provisioning with single sign-on with SAML. But if you have any other kind of single sign-on options, it does not work with those.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
No, I'm good. Yeah, thanks.
So now let's go to our demo. Let me go find my other window. So this is one of my dev orgs that I have, and I've been playing with it a lot. Some things don't work quite right, but you get to see that today. And so when we're talking about just-in-time provisioning for Salesforce Access, so let's go first to single sign-on. And this is building on the other study sessions that we've had, where you are going to create a single sign-on like you normally do. Right now, this is not enabled, so let me go ahead and enable it. And for this one down here, here's where you go to for the different SAML single sign-on sessions that you have. You can choose for one of them to have user provision, but not others. So it is done on the individual record here. So here I'm going to turn on user provisioning enabled under just-in-time user provisioning. And here's where I have the options to either use standard or the custom. If I use standard, Salesforce handles everything for me, and I don't have to worry about creating any users that have the right access. If I do custom, I can either have it created automatically for me, which I'm going to do that right now because I do not have one created. And then I'm going to tie it to one of the customer records that one of the users that has the right level of access. And this is where you want to give it, if it's only working for Salesforce org users, all it needs is manage internal users permission, and that's all that you would need to have. So now I'm going to hit save. And down here, you can see it created the Apex class. And it does say registration handler auto created, and it has an auto generated number for it. And then here's my user that I selected. One thing that I had not looked at is, so here's my class. I haven't seen if they give me a test class for it. Does anybody know? Let's see what it is. And it does not.
That's a
So
good
here,
question. Yeah.
yeah, I hadn't looked at it yet, but I did wonder. And I've been doing a lot of them, as you can see here, because I've been playing with it a lot. And there is no test class for this. So even though it gives you the class, I guess theoretically you're creating this in production and it's letting you create it without any test code coverage. Obviously, best practice would be for
Makes
you to
sense.
go back and create it for you. And you're probably going to want to modify the class to meet your needs. And you can't modify it in production, right? Because you can't edit there. This is DevOrg, so it works a little bit differently. But that's interesting to me that it does not give you test code coverage. So just curious about that. So now that I have that, let me see if I have.
Sorry, Marlene,
Yep.
execute handler as customer manager. What's this one? Sorry.
So this is, I have a user that I've
Okay.
created And so it's the one that I've created from my community experience site, which is why I call the customer manager. It
Okay.
is a best practice to create a dedicated user to provision users and not to use any of the other users, because that way it's easier to troubleshoot it and also to give it just the right permissions that it needs.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's just the name that I have for it. And I have it tied to, right now I have it tied to a read-only profile because I was playing with what permission sets I needed. And that's where I found out what I needed to have for it to actually work properly.
Okay.
And so here, I don't have an example. I haven't gone through and actually made it work, but in the past, I know I've worked with Okta and Ping Federate to do the SAML assertion for it to create the users. But this is really how you create it. And this is all there's to it. There's nothing else you need to worry about it. You would, your IDP would need to pass through your assertion with the right fields in it, and then you're all set. So this is just-in-time provisioning for Salesforce org. Let's look at a community site.
Marlene, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if we have certain let me step back actually. So when we are using just-in-time provisioning, would it be possible to dynamically assign the profile based upon certain criteria, or it will be always the same profile?
No, you can definitely assign different profiles depending on the criteria. And that's where you would want to go customize that Apex registration handler. So you would be able to say, based on this criteria, do this, and another criteria, do that. As long as you're able to get the data in from your SAML assertion. So when the user gets created, it gives you a department, or maybe it gives you, it can give you the different profile IDs from the SAML assertion. When we did it with Okta, each AD group, with Ping Federate, each AD group was tied to a different profile ID. So all of that setup was done in Okta, and it would pass it in that way. But we could have done it with the registration handler as well.
Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yep. And so I've already created a whole bunch of experience sites just for me to be playing with them. We're going to go to the latest one for my NTO customers. If I go to Builder, it lets me look at the pages for the site, but I want to go to Workspaces and look at the administration. And so here I'll go to Administration. And you want to go to Members to make sure that your profile has the right access to be a member of the site. And you want to go to Customer or Partner depending on what profiles you're using. I already have my NTO customer, so it's already there. And then you go to Login and Registration. So here, you're going to go to Login page. And I've already set this up. So I've already created my login handler, and I did create automatically here. I'm using that same customer manager you saw on the other site. And here it has to have managed user access. Otherwise it is not going to work properly. That should not be selected. And it's actually, I'm sorry, I've done too many lessons today. I'm confusing this with the other setup for the community. You still need to, you still need to go to single sign-on to create the SAML single sign-on for this community and set it up there. And so I don't think I have one here. I have not set one up because this is still my my domain name org, and so this will only send me to the website, but this is where I would change this to be my recipient URL that has my org ID in the URL, and then this is where you still do the just-in-time handler. This is where you have to do federate ID, otherwise that's not going to work properly. And I just don't have an example, but once you set this up with your community, it would work the same way as the other one. And so I've been playing with the mobile first login, which is why this is not set up properly. So I'm going to refresh this and not change anything. But again, for the community, you're still going to work with your IDP to go to the right place, and the same SAML single sign-on with just in-time provisioning. You still set it up in the same place. Question? I didn't really demo that very well, so I apologize for that. Let's keep going. And now let's talk about single sign-on for mobile first identity. And so mobile first login, what is it? So this is where you can add this to your experience site to simplify registration for your customers. Instead of having them create a username and a password, you can have them provide very minimal information, something to identify them. And with that information, you send them a verification method to send them a code. And so instead of using passwords, they just get that code either in their email or in their phone. And then they don't have to worry about remembering any passwords. You can include the password option if you want to, or you can use social sign-on for your experience site in combination with mobile first login. The benefits are of course going to be that your users are more likely to want to register for your site without having to remember one more set of passwords. I can tell you my husband always gripes about having to remember one more password. And then he also worries about it being compromised. So he likes to not have to create those credentials. And that also reduces the number of passwords they have to remember. So there's 3 steps to enable this for your site. You of course have to have a site. So I'm not going to go through that today because it takes a little while to get that set up. But you create your experience site. You're going to set up what's called a login discovery. And then you're going to set up self-registration, because if you don't do self-registration, people can't actually set up their login discovery methods. And so you do this where I was showing you before. You go to your site, you go to workspaces, administration, and login registration. You're going to find the login page setup section. And then from there, you're going to set up login discovery page. You can update the login prompt if you want, but you don't have to. And again, either provide an Apex class or auto create it. And then this is the login user that has to have the manage users so that it can create those users properly. After you've done that, you're going to set up self-registration, and it's in the same place. It's under administration, login, and registration. A little bit lower on the page, and I'll show it to you in a little bit. You are going to look at the registration page, and then here you're going to the way that the Trailhead module has you do it is you can do your configurable self-registration page, select the fields that you want to request from the user, and they encourage you to leave it really light. So do first name and email or phone number, and then create your Apex class, your login user, and then also select the profile and the account that is going to be tied to all this. All this is really fast to set up. And in your developer org, you only have a set number of licenses. So be careful when you're doing this, because if you end up registering a whole bunch of users, you run out of users. And also your email address has to be unique. So you need to make sure that you're using different email addresses to set those up. And so the way that this works before we do the demo is what login discovery is doing is first, it's going to say, what is your identifier? And your identifier can be different from your verification method, which gets a little bit confusing. So maybe my identifier is my phone number, but I want you to send me the verification code to my email address, right? So there are 2 different things. So Salesforce is going to say, what's the identifier? Is it valid? Is the format valid? For an example, phone numbers have to be a particular type for them to be used, and same for email address, of course. It's going to look up at the user to find that record with that identifier. It's going to see if the user is active. The identifier has to be unique. So once I use a phone number or an email address as an identifier, it can't be tied to multiple user records. It's also going to check if the user has already used that verification method in order to be able to use it again. If it has not, it asks for a password if you have that set up on your experience site. If you do not have that set up in your experience site, it just gives you an error, which is what I'm getting right now, and I'll show you that to you in a second. And if that identifier has been used, it's just going to send a verification code. If it's all done correctly, it's going to allow access to the site. So there's quite a bit that goes on with the login discovery, but it's all being done by Salesforce in the back end. Any questions there?
Where does it exactly check this, Marlin? Sorry.
No, good question. And so let me go to, let me see. Did I hide my window? I think I did here. So let me see if I have one that we can look at. Let's go to users. And I'm having problems because for some reason my dev org is being blocked by Yahoo. And so there's this thing here called third-party account links. That it's going to be available here, but it's also going to be available on, see it here. Go back to users because it actually asks this. So there are these two fields, so user verified mobile phone number, user verified email address, admin trusted phone number. I think it's these three. And so here I have that my email address is verified for this particular external user. So let's look at this one. So on the user record, there's a couple of flags. It's not showing me to me on the page. And I think it's because Yahoo, like I said, Yahoo's blocking these verification codes from being accepted. So they keep bouncing back. But in another developer org, when I had done it properly, I was seeing these down here as third-party account links that I can use them to be verified. But they're stored in a separate object that is associated with your user record.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just, it's failing for me. So, but also on the user, you have those two flags for verified email, verified phone, and then admin verified phone number. Admin trusted phone. And I think, let's show you one more thing before we go to the full demo. And so here, what's really important when you're doing single sign-on, when you're going to add single sign-on to your experience site, where you select this is you go to your auth provider. So if you've set up Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever your auth provider is, at the bottom of that auth provider, each one of those has a set of SSL URLs that you need to use. And it's going to give it to you for each one of the experience sites that you have. And so make sure that if you're looking to set up one of these social sign-ons for your experience site, you're going to that individual auth provider, getting the URL, because you need to do that to set it up with your single sign-on provider. You also need to add that logic to your login discovery registration handler. So you need to modify the Apex class in order to be able to use it. But I wanted to show you this because you'll see that in the site in just a second. And now let's actually go to the demo. I'll refresh my page, make sure I didn't change anything. And so this is where you're going to set up the login discovery. So here, login page setup. You can choose any number of things, but when you do login discovery, this is where you can do mobile first, passwordless login. If you don't change what this says, the page will show the default phone and email, but you can make it say whatever you want. And here I was playing with it. So let me actually show you side by side. Here's my experience site. So right now, I don't have anything entered. So it says phone and email. But if I want to make it something a little bit friendlier, I can. I will pick my Apex class, again, my customer manager. And then here, I'm not going to do any single sign-on right now. I will leave that alone. But down here under the registration page, I'm also going to do the configurable self-registration page. I have first name and email address for me to register. Again, there's a different self-registration handler that you need to either create or auto-create. You still have the same user. I don't know why it's on here twice. I guess you could choose to do one page, but not the other. I'm using the same user. That way it's consistent on permissions. And here you choose verification methods. So here it has none. If you choose none and you try to save this, it's going to give you an error. If there are no verification methods, then you have to check the box for include password. I'm going to leave it on email. And then here, by default, these users will be created with one profile. And then I'm using the business account, non-person account aspect. So it's going to be creating those users under this one account. So before I hit save, any questions on this page? No, let's go look at our page. And so here I can log in, but instead I'm going to sign up. But before I do that, I'm going to refresh the page. And here you can see my login prompt has been updated. So enter your phone or email to receive a verification code. Because if it doesn't tell you anything, I think it's weird that it just shows you phone and email, and obviously, you need to enter something, but it's just odd the way that it does it. When you go to sign up, it's only going to ask me for my name. So I have an email address that's going to work for us. And when it does that, it's going to send me an email address to that email address with a verification code. Let's see if it works for me. Nope. So Yahoo is blocking my emails from this address. What's funny though is it blocks them and it tells me that it's not being allowed due to a policy, but it still sends me the email that it sent. But now I have a verification code, and here's where I'm still getting an error, or I was earlier. Let me verify it. Hey, it worked. So now I'm able to log into my site, and obviously I haven't customized the site at all, so it's the ugly one, but let's go back to users. When I go to users, let me see. It let me in, so we know I created the user. This is where I'm getting glitches on my site right now because I'm in the site, but it's not letting me do anything to it. So, but let me show you a different one. Yep, this is the one that I just created because it's the email address that I entered. You can see I only provided a first name and an email address. And so it's making up everything else about me. My last name is external user and a random generated number. The same thing goes for alias, and even my username is this really quite ugly thing, and it's a fake one at company.com. This is where you want to customize your Apex class, where to do different things for you, right? This is the out-of-the-box auto-generated Apex handler that when I go here, I'm a registered user, and when I go to my profile, I actually see the same information. I'm calling myself external user 1234. That's not particularly friendly to my customers, even though I made it easy to access the site. Now I really feel like a number because I'm literally a number. So I would definitely customize this to make it better. This is also a place where the next time I come in and log in, I can show this user a login flow to collect more information about them, right? So now that they come back, I can ask them for their phone number or their last name and update that information on here. So any questions on that? Right, then if you guys are ready, we're going to do the quiz. So I posted the link on the chat, and let me find window. And so I put the link on the chat. If you guys want to join, I'm going to go to the next slide. And if you guys wouldn't mind giving me some feedback on today's session, I would appreciate it. I'll give you guys a minute to log in and to let me know what you think. go on to our quiz. So as a reminder, I've added source links for the question. So if you see the link, just wait until you've answered the question to get a hint and see what it's about. Or if you're studying in the future for when you're taking your certification, you can see where the information is coming from. And now let's join the quiz. Let's start the quiz. We have 18 questions. Question 1. What fields can be updated from the SAML assertion for SSO with just-in-time enabled for Experience Cloud? Select 3. And so you can do both standard and custom user fields, and then only standard contact and only standard account fields. And today we have 18 questions. At the end of today's session, I'm going to make this quiz self-paced so you guys can finish it in case we don't have time to go through the whole thing. Next question. Where do you find the single sign-on initializing URL to support social sign-on with LinkedIn during Discovery login? Select one answer. And I forgot to show you. In a second. And I forgot to show it to you, so I apologize. Let's go here. I'll do it really quick. Auth providers. I have oodles I've been playing with. And so when you go to that individual auth provider, at the bottom, it has Experience Cloud sites that you want to open up. And then whatever sites you've set up for your org, it will give you the URLs for each one. And then you can test it, or you can actually do single sign-on with them. And so it is for each one that's going to be a little bit different, and it does use the domain name that you have on your site. Next question. Question 3. What options support just-in-time provisioning? Select 2 answers. And so this one's tricky because just-in-time provisioning is only supported by SAML single sign-on. And so we have the regular one and we have community. You can create users through OAuth providers and OpenID Connect, but it does not use just-in-time provisioning. So that's why this one is a little tricky, because even though you can create users all sorts of different ways, just-in-time is only for single sign-on, SAML. Next question. What verification methods are available for login discovery for customers on Experience Cloud? Select 4 answers. I didn't cover this, so it's okay if you guys have questions on this one. So it's a little bit different than multiple factor authentication. Definitely email and SMS are supported, but it also supports the Salesforce authenticator, not built-in authenticator. And it U2F, so the physical keys are supported. One-time use codes are supported. And there was another one. I'm forgetting the other one. But it does, it's a little bit different than MFA. And the built-in authenticator is not supported, neither is a certificate. Go on to the next question. What permission should be assigned to the just-in-time execute handle as user for Experience Cloud? I'd like 2 answers. Should only be 1 answer. We might all get this wrong. I will look at this question because I think the question is wrong on my quiz, because the correct answer is manage users and only manage users for Experience Cloud. Well, actually, maybe that's the problem. But this is where I'm getting confused. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The just-in-time user for Experience Cloud should be external users and managed customer users. And what I'm talking about there is this one. So let's go to single sign-on. The single sign-on, this user execute handler as on SAML single sign-on should only have the permissions it requires. So if it's for a Salesforce site, it should only have internal users. If it's for an Experience site, it should only have manage
External users. Right?
external users and manage customer users. Those are the 2 permissions. So this is for just-in-time SAML single sign-on. What's different is if you're using this execute login as on this page, this one requires manage users permission. Do the 2 different examples make sense? Because it's different permissions depending on how you're doing it. So just-in-time provisioning is specific permissions. Experience Cloud login page is the umbrella permission of managed users. So I'll make sure that I have the question properly set up on the quiz, because I got those confused in my head when I was talking about earlier, so I apologize. And as I figured it out, I'm like, oh wait, there's actually 2 separate scenarios and 2 separate sets of permissions you need for each one. Questions, or are you guys okay? Let's go to the next one. Question 6. What happens if a user is not found for SAML single sign-on with just-in-time or Salesforce standard login? Select 1 answer. And so the user is going to be provisioned. So with just-in-time provisioning, if the user is now found, it will create the user for you without having to take any additional action. And so now let's look at our leaderboard. I don't know who me is. Hi, me. But good job, me. So now we're going to go to the next one. And we have about 7 minutes. We should be able to get through a few more questions. So verify an identity is the same as identify an identity. True or false? And so you can identify somebody with their phone number, and you can email them a verification code, which is why identify and verify are separate things. It could be both. You could identify them with the phone number and send them an SMS message, and then that would be the same thing, but it does not need to be. And I think this could easily be an easy, tricky question on certification. If you're not reading it right, it might throw you off because identify and an identity are really, really close together. Question 8. What is the sequence for the login discovery registration handler? And so you're going to put them all in order. Seconds. But this one is hard because I get confused in 1, 2, and 3. First is going to say is the identifier provider valid, kind of a format check. Then it looks up the user, and then it sees if the identifier is unique. So I guess if it returns multiple users, it would know that it's not unique, and that's why it's checking that as number 3. Once it verifies that it is unique, it's checking to see if it's been used before by that user. If it has been used by the user before, it sends the code. The user enters the verification code, and if it matches, it allows access. The 1, 2, and 3 for me are a little bit strange, the order that they're in, but I guess it kind of makes sense. The lookup user returning multiple records is why it bounces back. Go to the next question, question 9. Where is just-in-time enabled on the org? Select one answer. For the answers, I'll stop it at 15. And so it's on the individual SAML single sign-on setting. You can have one SAML that does not do just-in-time provisioning, and you can have one that does. And so let's say you had one for your experience site, and that one does do just-in-time provisioning. You don't have to use it for your Salesforce standard users. Question 10. On Experience Cloud, only users can register verification methods and register, and both register the site admin can register, and sorry, I can't read, and site admin can deregister them. True or false? a second. I'm so sorry because I butchered reading it, but only users can register their own verification methods, but both users and site admins can deregister them. So this question's a little bit funny. So sorry about that. Question 11. On an Experience Cloud site, select none for verification method to create new users and allow them to access the site immediately. True or false?
But you said it was throwing an error, right?
Maybe. Does that influence your answer? Do you remember where the error was? So if you have no verification method, a password is required. And so you wouldn't ever just allow people into your site to allow them immediate access to the site. So that's what the error you were talking about, Sita, that if I try to do none and I don't check the password, it does not let me continue. You have a question? Yeah. Okay. Question 12. The last one. What is the flow Salesforce uses to find a match before creating a record for SAML with just-in-time provisioning?
I think this is an easier, right?
It's easy when you know it. So user is first, then contact, and then account. So it's going to do the matches in that order, and depending on what it finds, it creates them in the reverse order. So I and me are up there, and I'm going to publish the quiz in the next few minutes, but if you just want to give me some feedback on the quiz, I appreciate it. And then we'll wrap up. And so in about 10 or 15 minutes, I will publish the quiz and you guys can finish the last 6 questions on your own. I'll publish the slides. That way you'll have those as well. And then I will, thank you, Badisha. Yeah, the reference links help me a lot. And so that way you can go check to see what helped you there too. We're not going to meet this Sunday. We're not going to meet next week because I'm out of town traveling. And then I have published the next, I want to say it's on March 15th is when we'll do our next session. And we're going to be talking about OAuth flows, which is going to be lots of fun because they are very complicated. And hopefully by then I will have passed my certification. And if not, I will have more information to see what I need to study. But have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you for attending. I really appreciate you guys being here.
Best wishes for your exam. Even I thought, okay, in case if we go through the questions and there is some question you have no doubts, or know your answers are different from what is been there, can we check with you or come back to you and check with you since the session
Absolutely.
is over?